Okay, we'll go ahead and get started tonight, 6 o'clock. This is going to be another relatively short one. I don't know if we're going to use a full hour tonight, but thanks everyone for joining for our last virtual rules hour this year. We're kind of finishing up with a little bit of something different. With some of the sessions, some of the previous sessions we've kind of gone through with penalty relief, free relief, match play, stroke play, a lot of the things you'll find in the standard playing rules 1 through 25. But finishing up the series this year is something a little bit different that you won't find in the thinner books. You'll find in the bigger, thick official guide to the rules of golf, and that is model local rules. A lot of us are probably familiar with local rules. We may have certain local rules in effect at our home courses, clubs, leagues, competitions we've played in. Some of us might have been familiar with them in the past. Some of us might not be familiar with them. You might be familiar with local rules and you don't even know it yet. So I'm going to finish up with something a little bit different and go in a little bit different direction. George is going to control the PowerPoint tonight. He's going to take us through kind of the heart of our presentation, and then I'll wrap it up at the end. And like I said, we'll leave some time for questions. Again, it is being recorded, so we are recording it. We go back for later review on the website. So we'll jump in. Here's a little bit of an overview of our discussion tonight. We'll talk about what is a model local rule, talk about how to implement them into our leagues, clubs, events, whatever that might be. Talk about some common model local rules that we might be implementing in our own leagues, clubs, courses, competitions. Might be useful for you, might not. We'll finish up with some committee procedures and some suggestions for leagues and clubs. And there might be some suggestions kind of peppered in through the PowerPoint as well, depending on what model local rule we are talking about. So go ahead and go next there, George. So we'll talk about what is a model local rule. And again, if you're looking through your rules of golf book that looks like this, you're probably not going to find the model local rules. You need to be looking in, like I said, this bigger, thicker official guide to the rules of golf to find those model local rules. So all they are is they're just supplementing the playing rules that already exist, rules 1 through 25. They might be dealing with a situation that rules 1 through 25 don't already address by themselves, but they might be just supplementing a situation that is in the playing rules. And we might just need to twist it and tweak it just a little bit to fit our specific situation. So all they really are is they're just tailoring the rule to our needs or the competition's needs or the league's needs, or addressing that specific situation. So they're only going to be authorized if they're, one, consistent with the rules of golf themselves and consistent with the principles outlined in our committee procedures. A common thing that we see with clubs or leagues or other competitions that implement local rules is sometimes they might put in a local rule that doesn't exactly fit what they were trying to do, or it might just go against what's already in the rules of golf to begin with. So a common thing we see is that it alters a penalty. It reduces a penalty that shouldn't be reduced. It waives a penalty completely, or it just totally twists and turns a rule that exists in a way that shouldn't be altered. So when we're putting in these model local rules or putting in a local rule for your own play, we got to just make sure that we're consistent with the principles that already exist in the rules of golf. A lot of those rules that are already in the model local rule section of the book, section 8 of committee procedures, a lot of those model local rules, they already have text written out that would fit your situation. So one we're going to see tonight is preferred lies, commonly called lift, clean, and place, or playing the ball up, however you might know preferred lies. A lot of the times, the way that preferred lies is written in the model local rule, that text is written just the way it is, and it fits everyone's situation, and you don't have to tweak it. You don't have to write your own text. You can just use the text the way it is, and the rule's there to serve you. So a lot of times when we're looking at local rules, if there's already one that exists, just use the text that's already there. Someone already went through a lot of thought to write that text out. Just use it the way it is. And again, when we're putting in model local rules, they should be available to all the players playing in that league, club, competition, usually on a sheet, a local rule sheet, or a notice to competitors, or sometimes maybe a hard card or a terms of the competition. Those local rules, if they're going to be in effect for your competition or your league, or your club or your golf course, what they should be available and they should be communicated to those players prior to the competition or that league or whatever that competition is starting. So need to be made available to the players and communicated in an efficient manner. Again, we have a couple principles for model local rules. When we implement a local rule, they have the same status as a rule of golf does. So anything that in those rules 1 through 25, how they apply to how we play golf, when we put in a model local rule or a local rule, it has the same status as all those other rules that already exist. So we're treating it just the exact same. Sometimes we're putting in a model local rule just for a temporary situation. So maybe we're putting in preferred lies because the golf course is really wet that day. But on subsequent days, or maybe a subsequent round, the golf course is going to dry out because the weather gets better or the golf course drains really well. And that situation really no longer applies. As soon as that situation no longer applies, we don't need that local rule anymore, or what we were ever trying to accomplish with that local rule doesn't exist anymore, or the situation has been rectified. It's best just to take that local rule out. So if we're only putting it in for a temporary situation, put it in for that situation. And as soon as that situation is gone or doesn't apply anymore, get rid of the local rule. You don't really need it anymore. And again, just to make sure we're being in accordance with the rules of golf, we can't use a local rule to waive or modify an existing rule or a penalty just because a committee might prefer it to be different. Me personally, if this was my perfect world, I would love to not get penalized 2 strokes in stroke play for playing a wrong golf ball. Just because that's my preference, I can't make a local rule that takes away the general penalty for playing a wrong golf ball. It's not really consistent with these principles we're laying out with these local rules. So we can't just waive or modify an existing rule or take a penalty away just because we don't like that or that's the way we want it to be. Typically, and you'll see this, go back for 1 second, George. Typically, we'll see this stated on a local rule sheet or a hard card or something or whatever method we're using to communicate these local rules. But typically, the penalty for breaching a local rule is going to be the general penalty. So 2 strokes in stroke play, loss of hole in match play. If anyone's ever read our CGA hard card, so the CGA local rules in terms of the competition, if anyone's ever read that document, whether you're playing in a CGA event or found it on the website, you're going to see written at the top of that page that exact sentence, unless otherwise stated, the penalty for breach of a local rule is the general penalty. And you'll see that as well in the beginning of the local rules section in this big book here. Sometimes it might work better for a local rule to be a 1-stroke penalty. That's fine. This isn't a requirement to be a general penalty for breaching a local rule, but generally for the majority of the local rules in the book, and generally for what we're putting these in for these specific situations, we're going to use the general penalty as our penalty for any of these breaches. So go ahead and go forward, George. When we flip back to that page or that section in our big official guide to the rules of golf, that committee procedures section, we go to section 8 for model local rules. These are all the different categories that we're going to find model local rules in that book. So as you can see, we have local rules that address out of bounds, penalty areas, bunkers, putting greens, required or special relief procedures, abnormal course conditions, things that deal with equipment, caddies, advice, pace of play policies. All of these different categories, they're going to contain all the rules that pertain to that specific situation or those categories. So if you're looking for a specific model local rule that deals with bunkers, you can flip to this specific section in the model local rules page, go find section C, and you're going to find all those rules that talk about bunkers. And again, you may find one that fits your specific situation. And that one you find that fits that situation, you might just use that exact text from the book and it's going to work great. Or you could use one from there and kind of alter it to the way you need and, maybe write your own that fits that situation. So all of these things, if you're looking for something that fits a specific situation, check the model local rules section in the book, check one of these specific sections to see if it addresses what you're looking for and kind of go from there. That's kind of how we typically use this section of the book. When we're implementing these model local rules for our league, club, or tournament, it's our recommendation, if your club or league doesn't already have one, to create a set of terms of the competition, or what we call a hard card. What you see on the screen is a screenshot of the CGA hard card. This is the one for 2024. So this is the brand new one for this year. If you play in a CGA event this year, this is what is going to be governing that specific CGA event. There might be some supplemental rules that go along with it on a separate sheet, but this is going to govern all CGA events for the entire year. So no matter what CGA event you're playing in, whether it's a men's, women's, junior event, all of these things are going to be in effect all the time. So it's our recommendation, if you don't already have one, create one for your league, for your club, or whatever that might be. Again, it's going to supplement all the competitions that are going to be governed by this one document. Again, we might have a separate sheet that governs this one specific event, and those are supplemental rules, but this is going to be kind of an overarching document, this one document we're using. It's not necessarily a substitute for the rules of golf themselves. We're still using the rules of golf to govern our play. That's kind of what's written in that top paragraph on the CGA hard card, where it says the rules of golf is approved by the USGA and RNA. They're still going to govern play, those playing rules 1 through 25. It's just, here are the things you need to know that are specific to this league, club, association, tournament, whatever you might have you. Yeah, and next.
Well,
So we're
great.
going to
I
go
think
over
we'll into some of our examples here of some of the more local rules that we're going to be seeing a lot on our hard card. So we're going to go over some of the more common ones: relief on opposite side of penalty areas, dropping zones, third lies, um, alternative shots, rule reflected by power lines. All of these we're going to go over in some detail just to give you an idea of what you might face when coming across these local rules. So B2, as we talked about earlier, B2 covers penalty area relief. And Lewis talked about some of the sort of philosophies when it comes to these local rules and why they're put into play. In this case, this is to give you another relief area when you might be coming across a sort of penalty area, maybe a boundary of the course very close to each other. And due to the layout of the hole there, one relief area has been taken away from you. So this local rule might be put in place just to give you another option on another side of the penalty area here. So we have a diagram here on the right, as you'll see. This is a very good one from the USGA. And you sort of get a feel for the whole layout where you might come across one of these examples. So again, you're sort of talking about lateral relief areas, typically those red penalty areas. And you'll see how the ball's crossed over an out of bounds boundary line, and you know it's virtually certain that it's in that red penalty area. Now, due to the layout of the course, you don't have the ability to take that lateral relief, those 2 club lengths to the side of the penalty area. So your really only option there would be go back on line, a long way back to basically to the tee box there, or to take that stroke and distance relief. So a lot of courses that have holes that look like this often in sort of imply and use local rule B2. So what you'll see here is you're taking that reference point of where you estimate that ball crossed that red penalty area, and then you'll be taking that reference point over to the other side of the penalty area, and then that is to become your reference point for your new relief area. So it's not going to be any closer to the hole. You're going to get 2 club lengths, and that's over towards a side where on the other side of the penalty area where you will be in play on the course there. And again, you'll see a lot of sort of conditions when it comes to these local rules. It's recommended that the committee only uses this for specific penalty areas rather than like a blanket local rule for the course, really only when it applies. So moving on, very similar to what we talked about earlier, we're going to be making more relief areas with dropping zones. You often see these around the course, maybe on the PGA Tour on TV. You'll see white circles on the ground, which have been defined by the committee to be a dropping zone for that hole. And these could be not only for penalty areas, but they can also be used in relief options for wrong greens, abnormal course conditions, dangerous animal conditions perhaps, penalty areas like we said, unplayable ball. And again, you're talking about more alternatives to stroke and distance. So often you'll see if there's perhaps a double green or greens that are very close to each other, the committee might say, hey, we're going to eliminate sort of the confusion here and just say anyone who's on that green is going to be taking relief in this relief dropping zone that we've determined here. And that can be same for use for any of these examples here. So if there's a known dangerous animal around the course, we can say, hey, the committee thinks there's going to be a lot of issues here. A lot of players are going to be coming across this condition, and therefore we're going to sort of save a lot of the confusion and create a relief area there determined by us to help the players out there. So a few things to consider. Dropping zones are it's easiest to think of them as a relief area. So as always, the player does not have to stand in the drop zone when they're dropping the ball. And when that player is using that dropping zone, the ball must be dropped in and come to rest in that dropping zone. So like I said, very similar to relief areas, has to be landing and hitting the ground in that drop zone, and it cannot roll out of that. Sounds pretty typical, but often we see people dropping it outside and having it roll in, but no, that's incorrect. It has to land and stay inside the drop zone. And again, another good point here, that line is considered inside the dropping zone. So keep that in mind with your balls coming in contact with that line, that will still be inside the drop area. So the committees often have a decision to make when it comes to where they're putting these drop zones. They still want to keep in sort of touch with the challenge of the course. They have to keep in mind a lot of the angles, a lot of the distance the shot requires. So they're going to sort of keep in mind the architectural challenge of the hole. Often you'll see if there's we'll get into some examples on the next slide, but if there's a penalty area that goes across a large part of the hole, that drop zone will often still ask you to hit the ball over that drop zone, over that penalty area. It's not going to be a cheat code to get around that water. If it's still a challenge of the hole, the drop zone is going to be behind it, and it's still going to ask the same question of you. Playability of the area should be considered. Obviously, you're not going to get a drop zone on a huge gradient there or a huge slope. And it shouldn't be an abnormal shot that you're being asked to hit. Obviously, the committee's going to use some common sense here. It's not going to put you behind a tree or on maybe a blind shot. It's really going to give you a very standard shot and sort of ask you to hit a pretty typical shot into the next shot. So it can be drawn in the general area, or it could be a tee box moved up. It's really up to the committee to determine where the best place to put that drop zone is. So we have some examples here. As you can see, our graphic design is pretty advanced here. So we have some red penalty areas in front of you. Starting with the top left, it's just that drop zone is still keeping in mind that penalty area. So instead of going over to the way left side of the fairway there, they've put it on the right side. So you're still having to sort of deal with that penalty area there. It's still incorporating the architectural aspects of the hole there. It isn't changing too much about how you play the hole. And then these next two, you'll see again on the right, these penalty areas are still asking you to hit over that water. It's saving you the trouble of finding a reference point, but it's still asking you to hit that shot. Now, a good thing with these next two is they show two different drop zones. Now, often this is the case when it comes to a larger penalty area. Instead of you having to walk 100 yards back to this one dropping zone, sometimes the committee will give you multiple options to act as relief areas when it comes to taking relief from these penalty areas. The one caveat with that is the committee has to determine which dropping zone you're to go to. It isn't a free draw. It isn't like you get to choose which dropping zone you go to. Too often it's the one you're closest to or the one you're closest to that's not closer to the hole. It's really up to the committee to define which one you're expected to go to. And then again on the left, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with common ground here. This is our 11th hole at common ground. You'll see those two dropping zones on the front left and the far right. Again, those aren't asking you to hit over the water or have anything to do with the water because that approach shot wasn't asking you to. So again, you'll see what I'm getting at here where it's not asking you to hit any extremely difficult shot or extremely abnormal shot, but really just continuing the type of shot that you had before that. All right, so as Lewis said, this is more getting into conditions that may affect your round of golf. Often, if it's rained a lot, you may hear, "Oh, we're going to be playing preferred lies today." So this is incorporating the lift, clean, and place procedure, where preferred lies is allowing you to um, lift clean and then place your ball at a nearer area around your original spot that may be a better condition, often using muddy conditions, or really where the weather's playing an extra factor and making things extra challenging. Um, so we're going to get into how to take this relief. An important thing to know is the committee can often make a additional local rule, which is only in the fairway cut height or less. That is often in play when it comes to preferred lies. We don't want you taking, lifting, and placing anywhere on the course, because that may give you relief from extra challenges that you may not be expected to take relief from. So, for example, if you were to get lifting in place everywhere, you could perhaps lift it out of the bush for a condition that you've hit it into, never getting advantage. So we really limit that to the general area, cut to fairway height or less. So getting into how to take relief, we're going to be using the spot of the original ball, and we're typically using one club length. However, again, that's up to the committee to determine that size of relief area. Sometimes you'll hear 6 inches. Sometimes you'll hear the size of a length of a scorecard. That's really up to the committee to determine that size of that relief area. And again, you'll all be very familiar with this. Must not be nearer to the hole than a reference point. It must be in the general area. Okay, so a newer one that we're going to be talking about that some of you might not be familiar with. This is Model Local Rule E5 offers, again, additional relief options for stroke and distance, or for a lost ball, or for an out of bounds. This came in the last rules change, so I'm not sure how many of you would have had a chance to use this yet in competition. Typically, this is more for recreational golf or the average level golfer. You won't really see this at the elite amateur level, but it's still a very good one to know when you're playing at your local level. So here on the right, we have an example for ball not found. Here you'll see a diagram where player on the left hit the ball into a bush, diagram point A, and this local rule is in play. So we're going to talk about what extra relief options they have here. Obviously, normally they only have stroke and distance, but we've introduced this local rule to alleviate this scenario where you get up there, you haven't played a original ball, and pace of play is a huge thing. We're trying to speed up the game as much as we can. So this local rule gives you the option to take relief up there already instead of going back and having to take stroke and distance. So as we get into it, whoops. So as I said, appropriate general play or casual rounds. So this whole pink area here is going to be your relief area. And the way you determine that is you estimate where you think your ball is lost, and then you're going to make a reference point as the point on the fairway that's no closer to the hole. So as you'll see at A, they've come across here, no closer to the hole, keeping that same distance, and they've marked it where that fairway starts. So from there, they're getting 2 club lengths, and that goes to the same at the reference point A, where they have 2 club lengths to the left where they think that ball is. And they can drop a ball anywhere going within that sort of tram line going backwards. And of course, they give you 2 club lengths there on the fairway. So with these extra penalty strokes, it gets you onto the fairway. And like I said, this relief comes with 2 penalty strokes. So you're going to be playing in a very similar sort of place of the hole where it's basically skipping you the step, going back and hitting another shot up. It's allowing you to take relief up there and saving you that stroke and distance by just skipping straight to the 2 penalty strokes there. And a good note there at the bottom, this local rule cannot be used for an unplayable ball. or a ball that is known or virtually certain to be in a penalty area. So this is really only for ball not found in the general area or out of bounds. And speaking of out of bounds, we have another diagram here for an example of what happens if your ball's out of bounds. And again, we have another player. They've hit it right this time towards a course boundary. They don't hit a provisional ball, and they get up there and they see it's out of bounds. So to save themselves going all the way back to the fairway, back to their last spot, they can take relief no closer to the hole in the fairway, and that gives them 2 club lengths or anywhere in that sort of pink area you see there going backwards. So again, that gets you onto the fairway. Your reference point is where the original ball estimated to have crossed on the course, crossed it out of bounds there, sorry. And then, like I said, your reference point is that point on the fairway nearest to the ball, but there's no nearest to the hole, if that makes sense. And in this case, fairway is general area cut to fairway height. So like I said, relief area, line from the hole, through the ball, the reference point, and then you get 2 club lengths outside of that. And then you get in line from the hole on that fairway reference going backwards. So large relief area you get to drop at. And again, it's saving you that self of going back. You're paying those 2 extra penalty strokes, and you're sort of speeding up the game by dropping up there and continuing on with your round. Okay, a bit more of a less common one, but again, one you may come across and that's very important. Ball deflected by a power line. Now, this is really only seen, of course, on courses with power lines. Often it will be a hard card rule there on the back of the scorecard. You may see it on the 5th hole, model local rule E11 is in play, so keep that in mind. So what that means in this scenario is if your ball is hitting that power line, you're going to be required to hit another stroke, and that first stroke does not count. And the caveat here is you don't have the option of whether or not you replay that stroke. There is no sort of aspect of this rule or sort of variation of this local rule that gives you the option of, oh, it hit the line, it bounced back into the fairway. I'm actually very, very happy with that. I want to keep going. No, unfortunately, since it's hit that power line and E11's in play, you're going to you have to replay that stroke there. Now, we get into what happens if you don't follow this model local rule, and like Lewis said, you're often going to be coming across that general penalty there for playing from a wrong place. Like I said there, general penalty. Okay, so moving on, we're going to be getting more relief options here. F5, movable objects close to the putting green. This is another one of those where you may see on the TV a lot on the professional level, PJ Tour. And this is in reference to any ball that lies lies anywhere other than the putting green and by a immovable obstruction. So I think we're going to see a diagram here. There's a lot of text here. I'm not going to read this all for you, but it's basically talking about the philosophy behind this model local rule, why it's in play, and it's really to save scenarios where there's a lot of mown area, low cut mown area around the green. It may be a sort of linksy type S course where there's a lot of runoff, and you may often be putting from off the green up onto the green. So this model local rule is really in play to give you the option to keep putting. Often you won't see relief from interference or line of play, but this is relief from immovable objects on your putting line there. So as we get into this a little bit more, how are we going to apply this? Often it's known as the 2+2 rule. So that means your immovable object has to be on the player's line of play, and that means it has to be within 2 club lengths of the putting green. So this isn't any immovable object anywhere. This isn't sprinkler heads. It has to be close enough where you're likely to be putting over it towards the hole. So that's 2 club lengths off the putting green, and also within 2 club lengths of that ball. So that's where you get the 2+2. 2 club lengths on the putting green, 2 club lengths away from the ball. And if these conditions are met, you may take relief there. So again, that's nearest point of complete relief, and then 1 club length relief area. Must be in a general area, no close to the hole. A variation of this local rule is that this only applies for a fairway cut height or less. If your ball's in the rough there, you're not going to be getting relief. This is often only seen under, I think it's f.5.2. So keep that in mind when you're seeing this in play. So there you go. Your ball within 2 club lengths of that sprinkler head. Sprinkler head is within 2 club lengths. There's a putting green there, and therefore you're going to be getting relief. Okay, so this is an important one for our agronomists out there. We are talking about F7, relief from seams of cut turf. Often you'll see when fresh sod has been laid down, it's still in those patches. Those sod seams, you're going to be getting relief from that. So we're going to get into it here. So, like I said, the purpose of this rule is to give you relief and to save damage to that freshly laid sod there. Sod seams. And this is really only applies when it interferes with the player's area of intended swing. If you're standing on the sod seam, you're not going to be able to get relief. It's really only when the player's swing is impacted by that sod seam. So now I'll leave time for questions at the end if there are any that pop up. But moving on, we're going to get into L1, and this is one that may save you at the end of your round. So this is sort of talking about scorecard options and saving yourself disqualification here, really. So modification for missing a player or marker certification. Often you hear about it on the PGA Tour where I think it was Jordan Spieth actually who failed to sign his scorecard, and if they catch him there, then instead of disqualification, they're just going to get a general penalty. So I'll get into the details here. So 3.3b, failure to sign a scorecard is often a disqualification. You need both the player and the marker to specify that. But there are situations where the committee modifies this penalty to 2 strokes. And for us, at least at the CGA, we may be using this at the junior level where you have a bit more beginners getting into the game, and it's a bit harsh to disqualify them for such a simple error. So we sort of implement this to negate that disqualification. So like I said here, if the player returns a scorecard about the whole scores, being certified by the player or the marker, the player gets the general penalty, and that's added to the last hole of the player's round there. So whichever hole they finished on, whether it's 9 or 18, they're going to be getting the general penalty for that hole there to sort of in place of a disqualification. So it's good to know when the committee has this in play. It can definitely keep you in the competition, but always good to be checking the scorecard there. So committee procedures. Lewis, I don't know if you want to finish this off here. I know I went through that pretty quick, so we can definitely leave time for questions here. But I don't know if you want to talk about the philosophies here of committee procedures.
Yeah, I can kind of take us to the end here. Thanks, George, for walking through all of those model local rules. So all those local rules we just talked about, and we kind of talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the presentation of how to implement those model local rules, but really the person or the group that's implementing all these is the committee. And going back to the basis of what is the committee is the person or the group who is in charge of the competition taking place. So whether that's the entire committee responsible for a league, a club, at the CGA for our CGA championships, we have a committee who's responsible for that specific competition. But as part of this person or this entity that's the committee is they have several roles and responsibilities in conducting a championship or a competition or a qualifier or a league event, whatever that might be. So part of the role of the committee is, when we already outlined one of them, to let players know what are the terms of the competition and what local rules are in effect for this competition. Click through a few of these here, George.
Sorry, I forgot I was on this.
So again, they're acting as the entity in charge of the competition. They're providing guidance on the rules and the conditions set for all players. So those terms of the competition. They're also serving as the final decision maker in anything rules related. So if someone requests a ruling or if something is brought up to an official or a referee, it might get referred to the committee, and the committee is kind of the final end all be all. The buck stops with the committee when it comes to any rules related decisions. So the big thing is, it's just when you're playing in a competition or you're playing in a league or a club or a CGA event, it's important to know who is the committee, who's in charge of your competition. That when you have a question about a local rule that may or may not be in effect, if you have a question about a rules related to situation that happened while playing your round, who do you go to? So who is that committee? It's important to know who that committee is. Go next. One of the big decisions that a lot of committees ask us at the CGA and ask us their opinion on, or if they have any guidance, is on the marking of penalty areas. And kind of wanted to include this here at the end because, again, it is such a frequent topic that we get at the CGA, and we get a lot of questions to our rules email about what do you make a penalty area? Can we make this a penalty area? Well, my ball went into this area and I wasn't sure. I was playing in a league event, whether I could drop from here or not. So thought it'd be good to include this at the end of our conversation tonight about what is a penalty area. And since we're talking about local rules and who the committee is, it's kind of fitting for our topic of conversation tonight. So anytime a committee is deciding about what to make a penalty area or what not to make a penalty area, we got to remember that one, bodies of water and areas where water should be, those are penalty areas by default. If we look at the definition of penalty areas, so lakes, ponds, ditches, seas, oceans, drainage ditches, rivers, streams, those are all penalty areas by default. So those aren't really decisions the committee is making. We see a picture there of some tall native grass on the golf course, and that could possibly be an area that a committee chooses to make a penalty area if they want to make that decision. So you got to consider that. Does that area significantly alter or detract from pace of play? It's possible. It might. If we make it a penalty area, does it maintain the integrity of playing that hole? If we're allowing players to drop here, is it significantly changing the challenge of playing that hole? Is the penalty for losing a ball there, would it be greater if it wasn't a penalty area, or does it significantly reduce the penalty by making it a penalty area? So that's another consideration there. And if we make it a penalty area, does it significantly impact the player's options of either playing that hole, taking relief, how they're going to navigate from tee to green? All those things need to be considered about whether a committee makes a decision to mark a specific area a penalty area or not. Next. So again, two distinct scenarios here about whether we mark them as a penalty area and whether we don't mark them as a penalty area. If we take the one on the left, we see that it's a pretty long, wide area to go over, and there may be a pretty long forced carry for particular players playing in a league or a competition or a club. So maybe it's possible that a ball lost here and allowing a player to drop in a certain place, this might make sense to make it a penalty area. Again, we see that we're going to have to go from one side of this area to the other in navigating the challenge of playing this hole to get to the green. And again, we have that forced carry potential for a player that may not be able to make that forced carry. And by not being able to make that forced carry, stroke and distance might be their only option if this wasn't a penalty area. So for some committees or some leagues, that area on the left side of the screen there in that picture, it might make sense to make that a penalty area and mark it as a red or potentially a yellow penalty area. If we look at the one on the right, where there's really no carry here, we can see that the hole is coming in from the back of that photo to the green that's in the middle of that photo. So there's not really an obstacle we have to navigate to play this hole. It's just an area of high grass that may be long of our green or to the side of our green. And the grass isn't very long, so we're probably not going to lose a golf ball in that tall grass. And it's probably short enough or thin enough to where we could play a shot out of there just fine. So on the right side of the screen in that example, this might might make less sense to mark this as a penalty area or mark this as an area where we're going to allow players to drop from in a different spot. So again, we're taking in all those factors and all those considerations in both of those scenarios. And these are all decisions committees are making, or the committee has to choose and make when we're marking this golf course, preparing it for play, deciding what rules we're going to play under, all those things. Next. Just a quick recap. And again, we have plenty of time here for questions or if anything model local rule wise we want to talk about here at the end. But quick recap of what we talked about tonight, that any actions the committee is taking with local rules, they got to be consistent with the rules of golf. We can't go back and modify or waive or decide to make penalties different just because we wanted to decide to do that or we prefer them to do that way. Applies for any local rules that we're going to be adopting by the committee. Some model local rules might serve one course or league or club or a competition better than others. If we're adopting local rules for a junior competition, some of those local rules might serve a junior competition better than they might serve an amateur national championship or the PGA Tour, or even some of our CGA championships. So some model local rules, they might be really fit for play over here, but they might not work for what we're doing over here. The best example of this is model local rule E5, which we already talked about tonight, that alternative to stroke and distance for balls lost or out of bounds. For casual play or for play that we're dealing with high handicappers that lose a lot of golf balls or hit a lot of golf balls out of bounds, or we're trying to be a little bit more lenient and friendly and get players moving and play quicker, that model local rule might work great. On the CGA side of things, we're running competitions for low handicappers or a really competitive competition or, our state championships, our state amateurs, state match play, things like that. Model local rule E5 might not suit what we're trying to accomplish with our higher level competitions as well as it does over here with general play or some of those lower level league competitions. So again, just because one league is using a model local rule and your league isn't, doesn't necessarily mean one is right or one is wrong. Just might serve one better than the other. All players need to be aware of those model local rules or those terms of the competition before we get started. Again, this is part of the role of the committee, letting those players know what rules are in effect. If we have a local rule, if we don't have a local rule, what are we doing? That's all part of the role of the committee, either by a local rule sheet, sending it out digitally on a website, giving it to players on the first tee, emailing it, whatever that might be. That's part of the role of the committee. They need to let players know before play starts so that all players can play by the same rules and be aware of that information. Another thing that we get to our office quite a bit, and this is our answer to pretty much all these questions, is when you're just playing general play, and we talk about general play, it's just you and your three buddies, or if here in the office of me, George, Kate, Ashley, we go out and play just a friendly game, just the four of us, we're playing general play. It's not a formal competition with a committee or, a field of players. You are your own committee. If you and your three buddies want to decide to play your round today with a certain local rule in effect, that's fine. You're playing by that rule you're setting out as part of your committee. Again, this is establishing this local rule before the competition begins or before the round begins. We can't just get halfway through the round and then all of a sudden decide we want to play lift, clean, and place because maybe we're not hitting out of, a certain club or a certain part of the fairway really well that day. We got to establish these things before the round begins. But for general play, you and your playing partners, you can form your own committee and play by whatever local rules you want to play with that day. The last recommendation we make is use the book. Again, there's that huge section of model local rules in that official guide to the rules of golf or available on the USGA's website. Use the book, see if there's things in there that might fit some situations that you've had come up or a league has come up or club or whatever that might be. See if there might be a local rule in there that might have fixed a situation that you didn't know how to deal with in the past. A lot of really good stuff in there and a lot of stuff that people have put a lot of time into thinking through all these scenarios in all these different situations. So if you think there might be something in there that might serve your league, club, whatever, well, use that book, go see if you can find it and possibly try and put it in play. I think that might be pretty good. We're just about 6:45. We'll open up some time for any questions, or if we want to go back to a specific local rule and talk through something maybe you didn't quite understand, drop it in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourselves. We'll leave some time for questions. George and I will kind of hang on here and address anything that comes up. We'll hang on for a couple minutes here. It's about 6:46. We'll hang on until maybe about 6:49, 6:50, just in case. While we're waiting for questions, or if anyone's thinking of anything, again, thanks everyone for joining us for our last virtual hour tonight. Any of the virtual hours you may have missed are available on the CGA website to go back and rewatch. We're kind of getting to the end of our CGA winter spring rules education as we shift back closer to our competition season here at CGA. So we're always available for rules questions or rules inquiries here at the office, even as our education season is ending. So please reach out to us for any rules questions that may come up as you begin your own league and club plays and your own seasons as well. So, but we thank you for joining us for any CGA rules education opportunities. As always, here to help. And don't think we see, I don't know, not having any questions or nothing in the chat. We may end a little early, so we can get on with our night and enjoy the rest of our Wednesday evenings.